Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Mike Fitzpatrick is a type 1 diabetic who is interested in nutrition, health policy, and diabetes management. Mike has lost over 150 pounds following a low carb ketogenic diet, and more recently with a carnivore diet and intermittent fasting. He has been incorporating fasting since November of 2020 and has dramatically improved his health. In addition to shedding over 150 pounds, Mike has maintained an A1C in the low 5% range, which is considered to be very low. He is constantly tweaking his fasting, diet, and exercise regimes. Mike has a powerful message about the dangers of playing with the up and down roller coaster game with high carbohydrate foods and big doses of rapid acting insulin. Before changing his diet, Mike was achieving what he was told was an acceptable A1C of around 6%, which many experts agree is too high. Low carbohydrate diets have been scientifically proven to reduce the need for insulin for type 1 diabetics. Less insulin injected has been shown to result in more predictable blood sugar, less hypoglycemia, and maintenance of a healthy weight, among many other health benefits. You can find Mike on Twitter at @itismikefitz. Mike Fitzpatrick, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Casey, thanks so much for hosting me. Really appreciate it.
It's so great to come across your work. I love finding people like you that are just so lit up and passionate. You are always sharing something interesting on Twitter, which I absolutely love. I loved learning about your journey, and I'm really excited to host you today. This should be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I'm psyched to be here.
Yeah, it's great. And losing 150 pounds, we were kind of talking offline, is really challenging to do under normal circumstances. But like you brought up to me, to do it as a type 1 diabetic, that's like really, really tough. What was that challenge like for you?
Yes, it's especially hard, not just as a type 1 diabetic, but also following the standard dietary guidelines set forth to type 1 diabetics of a high carbohydrate diet. That really, it screws with your blood sugars. And as you begin to lose weight, as you begin to incorporate exercise, your insulin dosing schedule, the amount of insulin that you require goes up and down, and your blood sugars fluctuate. So you have to figure out your blood sugars on a day-to-day basis. So things change, and the key is to be persistent, never cheat on your diet, and do the best you can, and be ready with glucose tablets and insulin to treat highs and lows.
Yeah, wow. Well, let's go back to your own personal life. What was your life like before getting diagnosed with type 1 diabetes?
Sure. Well, I was diagnosed when I was 14 years old back in 1997. So I just celebrated my 25th year with type 1. Back then, I was put on the standard ADA high carb diet, about 45 to 60 grams of carbs per meal, not to mention about 30 grams of carbs for snacks. I was using R insulin and I believe MPH insulin, and checking my blood sugar a couple times a day. Fast forward through high school and into college, I was taking monster industrial doses of insulin to keep up with the amount of carbohydrates I was eating. And of course, with the increased food came increased insulin and kind of erratic blood sugars. And I experienced a lot of weight gain. I'd always had some issues with weight over the years. And back in November 2020, I decided to get serious about my health. I found low carb living, Dr. Bernstein, Richard K. Bernstein, low carbohydrate living, and I took steps to turn my life around, and I managed to lose about 150 pounds, and get my blood sugar or my A1Cs down from the low sixes to the low fives.
Wow. Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. How did they know to diagnose you with type 1 diabetes?
So I had blurred vision. I was extremely thirsty, frequent urination. I was starting to lose weight, and I felt absolutely horrible. My parents took me to my pediatrician. They did a quick urinalysis and determined that I had ketones and sugar spilling into my urine. And then shortly thereafter, I went to the hospital, where I spent a few days learning how to treat myself for the rest of my life, how to do insulin doses, how to check blood sugars, how to count carbs, and that sort of thing. And then from there, you're pretty much on your own.
Wow. So were you eating more carbohydrates after learning how many carbohydrates you should have? Like, did you feel like that was an actual like increase in your carbohydrate intake?
I was definitely pressured to do that, to eat more carbs than I had used to was used to eating. Back when I was 14, I was just pretty much eating what I wanted, lots of pasta, rice, starchy vegetables, and that sort of thing, just as long as my carbohydrate count was in check, and just running really fluctuated blood sugars. It was up and down. I was having a lot of seizures from hypoglycemia. It was really a, a really like a living nightmare with the fluctuations in the blood sugars. And it really wasn't until I discovered low carb with the law of small numbers, where you take small amount of insulin for the small amount of carbohydrates, and things really got under control, and I got the smooth, flat level blood sugar. So that was made a huge difference to me.
Wow. It seems like with type 1 that it's not like a gradual thing that happens. Like you weren't experiencing things when you were 10 or 11 and it took them a few years later to make that diagnosis. It seems to hit really quick and go downhill really fast.
Yes, I think I got sick, and from that sickness, that's what developed, or my antibodies kicked into gear. They went a little crazy and destroyed my beta cells, and I think I had about maybe 6 months of a what they call a honeymoon phase, where my beta cells were still producing a little bit of insulin, but then after that, they were completely dead, and I was a full-blown type 1 diabetic. So
Yeah, and to be clear, at that point after the honeymoon stage, like without insulin, without taking any insulin, you're dead. You waste away and you die. Is that correct?
yes, yes, I wouldn't make it too long, probably a week and a half or so.
Yeah.
And it's not a pretty death either. You literally waste away your muscles, your organs, your fat. It all liquefies pretty much, and you pee it out. So
Yeah, so essentially, without any of that hormone insulin to keep things in the body, the counter regulatory hormones just go bananas, right?
yes,
Glucagon.
yes. And if you look at before the invention of insulin, what they did with the type 1 diabetic children, they basically put them on a starvation diet, and they were kind of locked away, and they slowly died over a period of time. And it was very sad to see. So when they invented insulin, then all the kids who were on that diet, they got the insulin, they started gaining the weight back, and they got back to a healthy weight. So it was really a miraculous discovery.
Yeah, about 100 years ago.
Yep.
It is really sad to see some of those pictures because you can tell those kids, like, they literally just waste away right in front of you.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
And another interesting thing is diabetes can happen to you at any age. It's not just in children. It's just as common to happen to you after the age of 30.
Hmm.
So I've heard of people in their 60s and 70s getting type 1 diabetes. So it's something that everybody needs to be concerned about and know the symptoms for. So
Yeah. Do you think there was some kind of a cause?
um, I think I got sick, I believe, when I was 14. I'm trying to remember. And after that sickness, it was like the fall time frame. It was just after football season. And I remember getting sick and then just drinking lots and lots of tea. And back then, I would put tons and tons of sugar into my tea. I was just craving carbohydrate. And I put more and more sugar in. Obviously, the more sugar I put in, the worse I felt. And it was just kind of a downward spiral until I started losing my vision and becoming insanely thirsty. I drink literally gallons of water per day, and it was like I just walked out of the desert like I hadn't had a sip of water. It's really torturous.
Wow, that sounds awful. How was this socially? I hear that can be a really challenging thing to go through as a teenager.
Sure.
What kinds of how difficult was that for you, even on like a traumatic scale?
Sure. Well, it's kind of weird shooting insulin in front of your friends. You don't want to really do that in front of people because you're a self-conscious teenager. Um, so that was kind of awkward, and checking your blood sugar is awkward because you get the stares and people are wondering what you're doing. Um, if you get hypoglycemia, which I would get a lot, you act kind of crazy, and people just think that you're off your rocker. So kind of just tried to keep the whole type 1 diabetes thing to myself. Only my closest friends really knew what was going on with that, and that's how I lived my life. And it really wasn't until the last couple of years where I really truly embraced type 1 diabetes and really tried to get more involved in the community and help others with the disease. So
Yeah, sure. Okay, so again, back then in those early days of just getting onto insulin, tell me, like, were you able to get to like a normal kind of healthy weight before the weight gain started, or was it pretty much right off the bat you were gaining too much weight?
So I would say as soon as I went on insulin is when I started gaining unhealthy weight. I did high school sports. I did football. I did wrestling, and that helped keep me in shape somewhat. But when I got into college, I kind of stopped the exercise, and that's when the weight really gained. And then that's where I sat for about 10 years, 15 years until I decided to get healthy. So I would say that there was a correlation between going on insulin and gaining the weight. When I was in high school, I was about 275 as a wrestler, and I did have a belly. Um, and then college, I got up to probably the 350s, 380s, and that's kind of where I sat for most, if not all, of my adult life. So
Wow, where was your average blood sugar through that time?
Um, I'd say my A1C was about 6.3, so I'm not sure what that equates to from a blood sugar standpoint. So probably about 140 or so, 150, which
Yeah,
isn't too bad. I don't know if I'm doing the math right, but all the research that I've seen shows that the moment that you leave normal blood sugars of a non-diabetic person, that's when the long-term complications start setting in, and increases your chances of getting those long-term complications exponentially. So really the goal for myself and everyone that I talk to and try to help is to get their A1Cs below 5.0, because that's truly non-diabetic, metabolically healthy blood sugar levels.
yeah. Were any doctors concerned about your A1C being around the sixes? I think most endocrinologists might say, like, yeah, this is about as well as we can control this.
No, yeah, the guidance these days, I believe is their doctors are happy if you get below 7.0. And I remember seeing that data from the type 1 T1D exchange. I think the average blood sugar across the United States is something like 8.5 or something crazy. The majority of type 1 diabetics can't they struggle to get below 7.5%. And it's really sad. And I really think that has a lot to do with the nutritional advice that is given to everybody. So
Yeah. So, okay, that A1C average is crazy. Just to clarify, is that in type 1 diabetics or is that general population?
that's type 1 diabetics. The
Okay.
general population, according to NHANES data, the last that I saw is probably around 5.6, 5.7% across the United States. And that's a quote unquote pre-diabetic level.
Yeah.
And things are just getting worse as the years go by. So
Yeah. Well, on that note, maybe now would be a good time to explain the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. I feel
sure,
like this is something we get into a lot on the show, but it's complicated. It's tough. People always have questions about it. They confuse
absolutely.
carbohydrates and insulin and all of these things. So, yeah, could you kind of explain how each one of those things work?
Absolutely. So type 1 diabetes, your body has an autoimmune attack, and your antibodies destroy the beta cells which produce insulin. So your body has no ability to produce insulin. So you are 100% reliant on external insulin sources. So insulin pumps, injections of insulin. Type 2 diabetics, as I understand it, it's more of a lifestyle type intervention. Um, I've heard it explained as being folks having hyperinsulinemia. That means their body is insulin resistant because it's been producing too much insulin, so their bodies can't properly use the insulin that is being made. So as I think Dr. Jason Fung had a really good analogy. He explained it as your body has sugar in the blood, and you can think of it as trying to stuff clothing into a suitcase. But the suitcases are full, but you have more clothing, so you sit on it, you try to jam pack it full, but the clothes aren't fitting in. So the clothes, go all over the place, and that's when the blood sugar spills out. The insulin is what helps get the clothes into the suitcase, if that makes sense. So type 2 diabetics, I think for the most part, it can be reversible with lifestyle interventions, with exercise and diet and losing weight. So whereas type 1 diabetes is not reversible.
Yeah. Okay. That was a really good explanation. I love that analogy from Dr. Fung. And that could explain why the average for general population for A1C is not higher than it is, because even though we've got such a high percentage of people who are pre-diabetic, the blood sugar is still somewhat controlled at that point, because you do have elevated levels of insulin, but it is controlling the blood sugar. And we're looking at the wrong thing. We're looking at blood glucose to diagnose diabetes and prediabetes. What we really should be doing is looking at the insulin. It would be a simple swap, and we catch so many issues way sooner.
Yes, I totally agree. And I would say the majority of the health problems that is being experienced, not just in the US, but the Western world and maybe the entire world, um, stems from potentially hyperinsulinemia and metabolic syndrome. And if we can make blood sugar testing and insulin level testing more common and more accepted, I think we stand a better chance as a nation to get healthy.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. So you mentioned some of the damage that can happen by having elevated blood sugar levels for a long period of time. Can you elaborate on what those might be?
Sure. Well, diabetes, high blood sugars affects literally every single organ in your body, from your toes to your eyes to your heart, to your lungs to your brain. It causes micro and macrovascular complications. So basically, all the cells in your body, if you have sustained high blood sugars, rots. So just think of the pain and the misery that that causes people with uncontrolled diabetes um, over the years. And that's why, in my opinion, diet and lifestyle is so critically important, and it's so critically important to eat a high protein, low carbohydrate diet to keep those blood sugars in check. Um, so retinopathy is a major issue. You can lose your sight. In children, I've heard of even not newly diagnosed children, they lose cognitive function in the brains. People lose limbs very often in this case. Heart attacks is very prevalent in type 1 diabetics and type 2 diabetics because of the macrovascular complications. So the list goes on and on. It affects everything.
Yeah, I was going to ask what the main cause of death for most type 1 diabetics is. It seems pretty dire.
Yes, main cause of death, as I'm aware, is the number one cause of death of non-type 1 diabetics, and that's heart disease. Only with type 1 diabetics, I think I heard a statistic, it's 5 times more prevalent,
Wow.
especially with those with uncontrolled blood sugars. So.
Yeah. Wow.
And
That's
when I say uncontrolled blood sugars, I'm talking about blood sugars that are not non-diabetic A1Cs. So I'm talking about even in the mid 5 range, you can see an elevated risk of cardiovascular disease. And there's published studies on that.
wow. So you're not talking about A1Cs at 10, 11, 12, 13. You
Right.
hear like really sky high numbers. This is slight elevations.
That's correct. Even 5.3, there's elevated risk for
Wow.
cardiovascular disease.
Wow. Yeah, that's astounding. I don't think many people understand how little sugar is actually in your blood. I think it's Gary Taubes who makes the point in the case for keto that you have about 4 teaspoons of sugar
Right.
in your blood. And if that goes up to 6, you're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes.
That's right. Yep. There's a reason why the glucose tablets that you can buy over the counter at different pharmacies, they come in doses of 4 grams, because 4 grams is what's in your entire body. So one tablet that you pop to raise your blood sugar, that's the equivalent of what is supposed to be in your body.
Wow. Wow. That's astounding. Very interesting to hear about. You talked about some of the tools that helped you manage the diabetes for a while. So, insulin pumps, different types of insulin. Can you talk a little bit about what tools you had been using and how they worked?
Sure.
The fast acting and slow acting insulin is always kind of interesting to learn about. Like, tell us like what kind of tools you used along the way to kind of help you.
Sure. So there, I think the most critical thing if you are a newly diagnosed diabetic is to get a blood sugar meter, which you physically prick your fingers, and then a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. So in my opinion, Dexcom makes the best CGM, and that integrates with insulin pumps. So you can do kind of a closed hybrid loop system. Personally, I use the Tandem Control IQ insulin pump. And that communicates directly with my Dexcom CGM. So my Dexcom will tell my pump what my blood sugar level is, and then my pump will give me the appropriate amount of basal insulin. And at the same time, if I eat a meal, I can tell my pump to give me a bolus amount. So a basal insulin dose is something that that's the insulin that anyone will need to get through the day without even thinking about food. So your body's constantly trying to raise its own blood sugar, and that's even without food. So basal insulin, that will cover that. Now the bolus insulin, that's used to cover food. And a best practice that I came across in the last couple of years from Dr. Richard Bernstein's book, if you're eating a high protein diet as a diabetic, really the best insulin to use is R, or regular insulin, as they call it, R in the United States. That's because it matches the action time of protein almost perfectly, as compared to the real rapid acting insulin like Novolog. So before I started doing that practice, I would use my insulin pump to use rapid acting to cover protein, and before I went low carb, I would use the rapid acting to cover the carbohydrates and all that stuff. So that's when I get the fluctuating blood sugars. But if you use the R insulin, you get these slow valleys and peaks that are easy to correct. But if you use the fast acting insulin exclusively, a lot of the times it's impossible to match up the rise that you get from carbohydrates with the action time of the insulin. So that's when you get the stochastic, the out of control, unpredictable blood sugars. So
Yeah, you and I offline were also talking about an episode of the Rivera podcast with, I believe, Dave Dykman. Was that his name?
yes, RD. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And he was talking about how the trying to match those things up is like trying to match two giant peaks. He said it's like, what did he say? He said it was like shooting a moving target with somebody on your shoulders or something. Like
Yes.
it's really tough to match those things up.
Yes. Absolutely. And it's not just hard to when you're just considering those two factors, but you have to consider things like your insulin sensitivity. Like, did you go for a run today? Did you exercise today? Did you exercise yesterday? That'll change how your body reacts to insulin. Did you get a good night's sleep? Are you stressed out? Do you have an assignment due for work or something like that? Or are your kids driving you nuts? Are you sick? All these things, I think there's a list of 42 different things that can affect your blood sugar levels. And you have to, as a type 1 diabetic, you have to take all those things into consideration as you're injecting this potentially deadly drug into you. So the more variables that you can take out of the picture, the easier time that you'll have.
Yeah.
And eating a low carbohydrate diet and using this the slower acting insulin, the R, that just takes a lot of the variables that you can't control out of it, and it makes life a lot easier. At least
What?
that's what
Yeah. What a nightmare. What a nightmare
it is.
trying to coordinate.
It can be. Yeah. Well, let me tell you, Casey, it's more of a nightmare if you don't know, if you don't discover the world of low carb eating and type 1 diabetics, because so many, I'd say most of us, if not all of us, that have discovered low carb, we were not told about it. We had to do our own research. We heard of anecdotes like on social media. We had to do our own research on YouTube and podcasts, and listening to shows like yours, to be able to find the truth for ourselves, because really it's not. It might be taking off a little bit now, but it's not being encouraged in the medical community. It's really a tragedy. And there's people out there that will live day to day with these peaks and valleys. They're going high and low all day, and it's absolutely horrible to live that way.
Yeah. So let's talk some details about that. Let's go back to, I don't know, whenever you feel like it was really the worst, you had not come across the information that you now know. What we talked about the long-term effects, and those are all terrible. What about acute short-term? Like what's a normal day, like in your worst times, and however long ago that was, maybe you can tell us when it got to be the worst, like looking back retroactively, like what was a normal day like? What did that look like?
Sure. Well, I'd say during my worst time with diabetes, I was taking industrial doses of insulin, these monster boluses for these ultra processed foods like Doritos, spaghetti, that kind of stuff, pizza, and it would be impossible to match up the carbohydrate with the insulin I was taking, as we just discussed. Add on the fact that I was also very insulin resistant because I was about 150 pounds overweight. So I was taking boluses of like 50, 60 units, which is unheard of. To put it into context, these days I take about 3 to 5 units a
Wow.
bolus for meals. So if I missed to the left or to the right of that, I would go either super high or super low. And several times throughout the year, I would have to be rescued by 911. I would have a seizure on the floor, make a big scene. I'd black out. Sometimes I'd hit my head. One time I was in the pool in the deep end and I took too much insulin. I had to be rescued by a lifeguard. That was real scary. It was probably the worst moment. And then, with all the insulin that I was taking comes the weight gain. So I think I had what they call double diabetes. So it's type 1 diabetes combined with the insulin resistance of type 2 diabetes. So just living that day to day, it was a living nightmare. And I'm so lucky that I discovered, I did the research and put the time in to discover the low carb way of eating. So
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. What was I just going to ask you? What was I just going to ask you? I remember. Okay, so you talked about how they told you early on when you were 14, they told you about carbohydrates and they told you how to cover it with insulin. That's not necessarily the same thing as like nutrition coaching. Were you, regardless of whatever the advice was, were you aware of like a better way to be eating, even if it was like something you don't do now, like maybe like plant-based or more vegetables, or was there just really like nothing? Doritos was just
no.
kind of fine.
No, they had a sliding scale. They told you how many carbs you should eat for each meal and each snack. And they didn't really say like what your macro, or what your fat and protein should be. That I can remember. It was so long ago, and I really didn't get very good nutrition advice. And I really wish I I had learned about this lifestyle back when I was in high school. I would have been so much healthier, and I think it would have helped my my grades and my athleticism and everything. So
Any
um,
any nutrition coaching, like anything through the years, you got like next to none.
none. It was all self-learned. Yep, everything. So
That is crazy.
I took the time when COVID hit to really dig deep and do as much learning and research as I could about the world of nutrition and healthy blood sugars and exercise. And a lot of people, they didn't make it through COVID, and a lot of people they kind of let themselves go. And I said, you know what, I'm not going to be a statistic. I'm not going to let COVID hurt me, because I was really nervous because I was extremely overweight and I was type 1 diabetic, and I was scared to death that I was going to get sick.
Yeah,
I ended up, I did get sick, but it didn't affect me at all. And I had gotten healthy by that point. So that was
that's
a
amazing.
big motivator. So
Yeah, that's amazing. So where first of all, how did you even have the idea if nobody told you that nutrition would make a big difference in your condition? Like what gave you that inkling to be able to start the research, and what were some of the first things you encountered?
so there was one night back in November of um 2020, and I just said, you know what, I've had enough of living the way I'm living. I'm tired of being overweight. I'm tired of feeling sick all the time. I had the energy of a bump on a log. Didn't get off the couch, and I said, I've had enough. So I started researching, and the first thing I did, I was already aware of Dr. Richard Bernstein's book and low carb, but I didn't start utilizing it until a little bit later. But I started researching weight loss, and I came across a video by Dr. Jason Fung um, about fasting and extended fasting, and that kind of got me down the rabbit hole of fasting. So I started doing some fasting. I really got into the low carb, so I combined that with very low carb eating, and I started experiencing success. And then instead of having a downward trajectory that was self-reinforcing, I started seeing results pretty immediately. And once you start seeing positive results, it gets addicting and you want to do more and more. Soon after I started losing some weight, I started getting more energy. So I started taking walks around the block. And those walks eventually, after months, started turning into running a couple miles, and then that turned into running 5Ks, and then that turned into running 10Ks several times a week. And now I'm training 6 times a week with resistance training and 10Ks, and I feel absolutely amazing. So along the way, there was I can't even list the amount of people that I studied. Gary Taubes, you mentioned, he was one. I went through uh, all the carnivore folks, Dr. Chafee, Dr. Baker, Amber O'Hearn. I went through like a high fat period for a point of time. I can't even name them all. Dr. Fung was a big influence, Dr. Bernstein. And then I saw a lot of posts by R.D. Dykman about the the blood sugars and stuff, and that really hit me, and I really became a strong advocate for um, this way of life, this way of eating, and control of blood sugars, which really go hand in hand.
Yeah, wow, that's absolutely incredible. Dr. Fung deserves so much credit. Do you remember the podcast? It was a limited amount of time that he was doing it, but do you remember the podcast he did? I want to say it was like the IDM podcast, and he would interview kind of day-to-day people and share their stories. Do you remember?
No, I don't. No.
Oh man, it's so good.
I have to look that up. The
Oh,
video that I saw, he was giving a presentation to a CrossFit
hmm,
on YouTube. There's a video
yeah.
out there, and that's the one. It was about an hour and a half, and that's the one that got me kind of down the rabbit hole. So
Yeah, that's amazing. We'll make sure to tag that podcast. Like I said, it was a very limited amount of time that they did it, but for I don't know, when you're learning about low carbohydrate, you think you're going insane. Like if low carbohydrate works, that means that all of the standard advice is wrong, and you think
yes,
you think you're going crazy like
yeah.
to learn about some of that stuff. But to
I I
hear the stories is
I
so
like
important.
I like to compare it to if you've ever seen The Matrix, when Neo wakes up and he sees like all the beds around him of people still plugged in, and he's awoken and kind of seen the truth and the light. That's kind of what it feels like when you kind of realize that what you've been told for so long is just it's wrong. Not just with diet, but also with diabetes management. So
Yeah, great reference. I do want to say, like, I found Jason Fung, and he was the only person who answered a question that I was observing. I've heard you recently talk about metabolic rate and resting metabolic rate in a recent podcast, and that was my whole career. Like, I spent over a decade working on a metabolic chart and measuring people's metabolic rate. I've heard you reference, the Biggest Loser study. I've actually done a test on somebody who did the Biggest Loser
oh
contestant. Saw
wow,
that, yeah, she trashed her metabolic rate. It was like that.
wow,
It was, well, not. It was hundreds of calories lower than it should have been for her
yeah,
demographic. And we knew that if you ate below a certain level, your metabolic rate would decline, which is why diets don't work long term. You can lose some
right,
weight for a little while, but when your body compensates, that's no longer going to work. Your body's burning less, and now you're going to gain like gangbusters. Yet I had people coming in that were doing fasting that were definitely not eating as many calories as their resting metabolic rate said they needed to, yet their metabolic rates were through the roof. And it was only Jason Fung's work that really was able to explain why, and explain that the body is taking calories from fat cells, so it doesn't need as much food, and the metabolism doesn't need to drop. It can actually go up hundreds of calories. It was amazing.
yeah. It's really an amazing, incredible piece of information. When I learned that too, I was kind of blown away, and I would do regular 48-hour fast. The longest fast I did was 7 days, and that was an experience. It was difficult to do, especially with the insulin. I had to tone down the insulin a little bit, but I made it through. These days, since I got to my target weight, I really don't do extended fast anymore. I do intermittent fasting. Maybe I'll skip breakfast, but I'll usually eat 2 meals a day, like a breakfast and a dinner, both very high protein. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, Dr. Fung was very instrumental in the start of my journey here. So these days, I'm really liking Dr. Ted Naiman, Marty Kendall. Those are kind of my biggest influencers now. The whole protein to energy that really sings to me. Getting your protein as high as possible and keeping your energy low, your carbs and your fats. So that's really I've been having a lot of success with that. So.
That's amazing. Yeah, we've posted both of them twice on the show and just absolutely love learning from them. They both do amazing research. That's fantastic. Can you comment on how surprising it was for you that something so miserable, fasting, going without food, sounds like the worst thing you could ever do? Can you describe how that flips magically? Like all of a sudden something that feels so terrible you don't even want to comprehend it becomes like absolutely amazing and something you
Yes.
like honestly want to do.
Yeah, I would look forward to fasting more than eating, to be honest. Back in those days when I had so much weight to lose, it's not only addicting because of how quickly you can lose weight. I think the first month I did it, I lost about 30 pounds. It was probably mostly water weight, but still, when you see that movement on the scale, it's very addicting. But um, it is kind of daunting at first. But when you're as big as I was almost 400 pounds. You try to think outside the box. You got to do something, man, to change your life, to change your health. Um, but I soon learned, um, if you can make it past the first 30 hours, you are good to go. I mean, your ghrelin levels, they get back to normal. The hunger is much more easy to manage. If you're taking your salt and your water, I'd have a big cup of black coffee if I got hungry and the bitterness took away the hunger, and I was easily able to go a couple days without eating. Towards the end there, when I was doing my extended fasting, I incorporated a lot of distance running, and that just helped accelerate the fat loss. And I was able to do 10Ks, often 60 plus hours fasted. So
That's amazing. Yeah, it's that fasted state too, man. Your brain is just on fire. You would think you'd be so hungry and just
yes,
craving food all the time, but you are in the zone. And it makes so much sense. Like if a lion is, not eating for a few days, he has to be mentally clear and have plenty of energy so he can go make a kill. And we would be exactly the same ways.
yes, and you along the way you learn all about the wonderful world of ketones. So I was measuring my ketones often. Um, Sometimes I'd get up to like the sevens or eights. I wouldn't feel too good then, and I'd have some meat, and it'd come back down to a more acceptable level. But that was back when I was really going crazy about the ketone levels. These days, I don't test anymore. But you come to learn that the ketones really, when they start taking over, that's what gives you the mental clarity and the focus and the energy and the drive. And it's a really wonderful feeling. I think everyone should try it if they're able to. It's a euphoric feeling. It's a natural high, and I strongly recommend it. So
Yeah. You also don't think you could do things like work out in the fasted state. And after a while, you won't want to work out in the fed state at all. It
right,
feels totally, totally different. It's so much better to
exactly.
work out in the fasted state.
Yep. To this day, I don't work out. I work out 100% in the fasted state, whether I'm weightlifting or I'm doing distance running.
Yeah.
I always eat afterwards. It not only gives me, I not only have more energy for my workouts, but it helps me with my blood sugars too. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. If you said let's go on a 3 hour hard tempo ride or let's go play 2 hockey games or whatever, I would much prefer doing that in the fasted state and eat
yes,
afterwards as well. It's
yes.
it's such a big difference. Okay, when you started to get on a roll on low carbohydrate, you finally are starting to see results. What is going on with your medications? What things are changing? What are you noticing? And then along with that, these medications have some heavy side effects. So
Right.
how is that also changing and how is your life changing because of that?
Yeah. So I was taking a lot of medication that a lot of people take who were as big as I was. I was taking medication for blood pressure. Um, and there came a time one day I went for one of my walks, a couple miles, and I got to my street. I turned down the road and I started seeing spots and I started blacking out, and I barely made it home. Tested my blood pressure, and I don't remember, but it was like ER, call 911 right now levels. It was I think they call it syncope. So immediately after that, I called my doctor and I said, "This is what's going on. I lost all this weight. Why am I still taking this?" And she took me off my blood pressure medicine immediately. Um, the same with I was taking Xarelto and metoprolol for heart, because I had some heart issues which have actually resolved. Um, and that's another thing doctors really aren't used to. Another thing I noticed, doctors really are not used to deprescribing medication. They're just used to prescribing medication. So when a patient comes in and says, "Hey, look, I was able to get healthy through lifestyle intervention," they don't normally see that. And they don't always know to look out for, hey, maybe I should take Mike off his high blood pressure medicine. So if you do this kind of activity, if you're starting a new regimen, just keep that in the back of your mind that you have to really look out for yourself and question the medications that you're taking, and really work with your healthcare team.
Yeah. So on that note, your healthcare team, I've heard you talk about this before. You must have had all the support in the world from your doctors across the board, right? You're losing weight, you're maintaining it, reducing medications. I'm sure your doctors were just absolutely in love with exactly what you were doing, or is that not the
Yeah.
case?
Uh, well, it's kind of funny with endocrinologists, generally speaking, they're at least from my experience, they're not very thinking outside the box. So no, to answer your question, no, my endocrinologist was not very supportive of me, unfortunately. They When I told her that I was doing low carb, she was adamant that I not do that, that it was very dangerous for type 1s to do that. And to this day, even after seeing all my success, she still tries to push me to take carbs. Um, I told her I was doing fasting, and she said that it was extremely dangerous and I should not do that for more than like 8 hours a day, and that I needed my snacks and everything like that. And after thinking about it, I was like, you know what? This is why I gained 150 pounds, is because I was listening to this advice, which was absolutely horrible. So that was another important lesson that I learned, that, don't always trust people in authority, and be a self-advocate, because oftentimes the advice that works for the majority of other people won't work for you. And I know that I'm just one of probably 3,000 patients that she sees. Um, and she was also, saying that my A1C may have been too low and that I should get that up. And I was like, oh, well, I started talking about the research that I had done with the increased risk, and she didn't want to hear that. That's typical. That's something that I would say the majority of type 1 diabetics will hear across the United States. So
Typical. That's typical.
yes, it's unfortunate. Yeah, it's very unfortunate.
I don't want to judge. I'm not this person. I just like that she didn't throw you a parade or
No.
go like skipping down the street
Yeah.
shouting
Yeah.
from the rooftops. Just blows my mind.
Yeah. I had like a 5.0 A1C, and she could care less. She's like, oh, okay, that's great. Next, I probably had the best A1C in her whole practice, and I lost all this weight, and it was kind of disappointing not getting an attaboy, but I don't look for attaboys from doctors anymore. So
Yeah, I know that's not your motivation. Your motivation is to really help people, and you're definitely doing that, which I love.
yep.
When did you decide to try carnivore? Was that a weird idea for you?
Yeah. So I saw I think it was Dr. Sean Baker on Joe Rogan, and then I saw Saladino on Joe Rogan, and then I saw the Petersons on Joe Rogan. I was like, you know what, I got to try this. So on it was March of 2022 is when I first started carnivore, and it was when I made the switch. Now at the time I was eating some vegetables with my meals, but when I made the switch to carnivore, oh my gosh, what a difference. Um, it was it was satiate. Like I could eat till I was full without having to worry about calories or macros or anything like that. I've heard Ted Naiman before. He's against like diet religions, as he calls it, but he said before that if you eat carnivore, it's kind of an idiot proof way of eating a PE diet. So you naturally eat just the right amount of protein to energy, because if you're eating the meat, you're not eating anything else. But the weight just fell off, and I was and I incorporated strength training with it, and I just put on so much muscle, and I just continued to lose body fat, and my body recomposition was just amazing. And I'm just continuing it to this day, and I just feel so much energy. I absolutely love the way that I'm eating now, and it's just it's mind-boggling that I never did this before. And I know it's kind of a trend these days, but I really think um, it would help so many people to give it a try for at least 3 months and see how you do.
Yeah, no, I agree. What was the name of the podcast that you sent me? You were hosted on it twice last year.
Yes. Lucy Fisher, she runs a podcast called Fasting, Life in, Fasting with Type 1 Diabetes, or Life in the Fast Lane
That sounds, yeah,
with
close.
Type 1 Diabetes. So I was on her podcast back in January. It focuses more on like Jason Fung and fasting and that sort of thing. But
Yeah,
I was on that twice.
yeah.
One that's kind of a check-in in January, and then a follow-up a few months ago. So
Yep. No, I love when I can find that. First of all, she's a great host. She did a really good job interviewing
she
you, and I
is,
loved
yes,
the interviews. I really enjoyed listening to both of those. But knowing that the one was before your transition to carnivore and the one was after the transition to carnivore, I listened to them chronologically. And so to be able to think to myself, I know he's carnivore. I'm listening
yes,
to the first one before the transition. He's not talking about carnivore. I already know, like you have no idea how great you're gonna feel, dude. You're gonna be so happy in a few weeks, in a few
yes,
months, like when you start. It's a total game changer. It's low carb is great. Keto is great. You will get really, really, really good results. But it's really, it takes that step. It takes that step to carnivore. That's the magic. That's when the crazy stuff happens. That's when the healing happens.
yes.
All of the weird stories you hear about people just getting so much better. You have to take that step to carnivore.
Yes, it guarantees an ancestrally appropriate diet, to quote one famous doctor
Yep.
um, in this space, Dr.
I
Tim
absolutely love
Berry.
that. I love that.
And y- protein is such an important, I would say it's the most important macronutrient, and I would think that the majority of people in the United States do not get enough protein. And if you eat carnivore, you're pretty much eating a guaranteed amount of protein that's going to get you healthy and help you build lean mass.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's fantastic. There's a bit of a split in the carnivore world. There's a group of carnivores that like to include things like fruit and honey and things like that.
Mhm.
Other group that says, nah, you really should be more just on the meat. What have you noticed? I'm guessing that adding lots of fruit and honey for your animal-based or carnivore diet would not go very well.
No, I'm not. I can't remember the last time I had a piece of fruit. It would just, I can't do fruit or honey because of my blood sugars.
Yeah,
If if the Saladino folks want to do fruit and meat, that works for them, that's great. I'm happy for them. But me personally, I just stick with meat.
yeah,
Um, um, I'll cheat every now and then, have a piece of dark chocolate, but that's about it. And of course, I'll have like some seasoning and some black coffee. So I'm not a true quote unquote carnivore, but the calories that I'm consuming are pretty much 99.9% coming from meat. But
yeah,
if someone wants to have fruit, God bless them. That's fine.
yeah.
Um, I'm not angry at them.
Yeah, yeah, me neither. And you're right. Like it looks like it's working fine for him. It's hard to help coach other carnivores who are doing it because they're not him, and I don't see it go very well very many times. I don't know
No.
many people that works really great for. It seems to
Yeah.
reactivate lots of sugar, cravings and
Yeah, absolutely. And I did when I first got into it, I did the whole you know, should I be eating the organs? I did the ancestral supplements, and I bought it once, and I was like, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore. I
yeah,
felt it's just not necessary. I really like Dr. Baker's line of thinking, where just eat the meat. You don't need to eat the organs. I'm not a fan of liver. I know some people are fans of liver, and it is a superfood. I will recognize that, but I'm not going to pay $60 for a bottle of liver pills.
yeah. No,
Sorry, Liver King.
he had some other supplements he was on as well.
Yeah, yeah, he wasn't natty.
Exactly. No, you're right. Like Dr. Kevin Stock, who's a carnivore, put out a newsletter. He puts out a great newsletter, the Saturday 7, I want to say. And he made a note a few weeks ago when he put out his newsletter, like 10 traits of people that he's noticed that have done carnivore for 10 years. And that's one of the things he said is like, I don't see a lot of people who are doing long-term carnivore that are eating organs. It's just not really a priority. They don't make it a thing, and they do fine. So I don't
Yeah,
I don't think many people eat them anyway on a mixed diet, so I don't necessarily see the need for tons and tons of them on a carnivore diet. I don't know why that would be any
yeah,
different.
yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, they're just
Mm.
nasty.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
just my opinion.
Exactly. No, I was doing the same. I was spending a lot of money on supplements. I was doing the frozen as like kind of pills, and
Yep.
every
Yep.
now and again it sounds okay to do, but by and large, yeah, it's a lot easier to skip. Is there any concern with type 1 diabetics and taking in too much protein?
I've heard the myth that protein can be dangerous for type 1 diabetics. Dr. Bernstein has a really good video um, regarding protein and type 1 diabetics. Everyone should research it on YouTube after they listen to this podcast. But essentially, if I remember correctly, he was at the some symposium, and the doctor did a study on high protein diets in type 1 diabetic rats. And it turned out that that doctor found that the high protein diets actually hurt the rats. But what they didn't say is that the doctor was running the rats' blood sugars at abnormally high levels. And it wasn't until they actually reran the study with the rats at normal blood sugar levels that they determined that the protein was not harmful to diabetics. So you have to understand the context of blood sugars. So if you have normal blood sugars, you really don't have anything to worry about from my perspective. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, but that's the research that I've done that I've heard. So
Yeah, that's great. I love that you have gone in and found the differences in context. We get that so much, and it's not like they come out and say, "Oh, we goofed up on the first study" or anything. That doesn't grab any headlines, and so you never
right.
really care about that. You have to go dig. You have to go research
Yes.
exactly the same way that you did. It's hard.
Yep. Yep.
So what's a normal day of eating like for you now?
So I will normally these days I'm really into the high protein, low fat. There was a time that I was higher fat. So I will have I stock my fridge with chicken breast, fat-free Greek yogurt, fat-free cottage cheese, fat-free mozzarella, fat-free cheddar. I'll do sirloin, top round beef. Absolutely love salmon. I try to eat fresh salmon as often as I can. Tuna, eggs. I eat lots of eggs. I probably buy about 90 eggs per week, just because I go through so much. And I also supplement with whey protein powder. So
Yeah, that's nice. Do you ever have days where you're craving a little bit more of the fat and you want something a little
oh
fattier
yeah,
versus?
oh sure, oh sure, oh sure. If that's the case, then I'll have uh, some fattier cuts of beef. Maybe I'll have some ribs or something like that. But I really love the feeling that I get with the lean protein. It's really satiating.
Yeah.
Um, and that's just me. I mean, I'll probably kick the fat back up when I'm a little bit leaner. Um, but right now I'm liking the
Yeah.
way I
Wow,
seem to
that's
be.
great.
So,
That's great. And so you got into running, you then got into strength training, and I've heard you say recently on that podcast that now you're thinking about a Spartan race, which is a perfect
yes,
combination of endurance and strength. Do you know which one you're going to do?
I you got me there, Casey. Yeah, you did your research too. I'm still training. I haven't decided yet. I don't know if this summer is going to be it, but I need to work on my pull-ups a little bit more if I'm going to do that. But that's definitely on my bucket list. That's one of my goals. So I've got several races, 10K races in the book so far this year. So I'm going to have to see if I can fit a Spartan race in. But
Yeah,
that's definitely something I wanted to do for a very long time.
very
You
cool.
looking back when I was really heavy, looking at doing all these things, it was a pipe dream. But these days, if you get your nutrition right, if you get your exercise right, you can make anything happen. And I know I can make that happen too. So
That's so cool. Wow, that's so cool. Yeah, definitely work on the push-ups, or I'm sorry, the pull-ups.
yes,
I did Spartan one time. It was great because I was already kind of transitioning into like a higher fat, kind of lower carbohydrate. So I got to do the whole thing fasted, which was awesome. Didn't have any goos or gels on me or anything. But I didn't take the strength training as seriously, and I literally failed all of the pull-up like activities in the Spartan. And if you fail one of the obstacles, you have to do 30 burpees. And
no,
so 150 burpees on the day, like those last 20 burpees, I would say were pretty
no,
miserable. So yeah, work on the upper body strength. But it's so much fun. You'll love it. You'll do
yeah.
great.
It sounds like CrossFit would be a good way to train for those. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think CrossFit is a good mix. The one thing I don't see as much in CrossFit, and I could be wrong about this because I don't do it, is I don't see as much of the kind of endurance aspect. You know,
Mhm.
a Spartan race, I think the shortest ones are like 3 miles and longest ones are like a half marathon. But you
Mhm.
already have that. You have been running 10Ks. And so you
Yeah.
probably already have a really good base for endurance, and maybe some explosive strength training
Yep.
could help you there. But you'll love it. You'll do great. You'll do
Yeah.
great.
I'm looking forward to it.
That's awesome. Your kiddos, you got 3 kiddos?
I've got 3 kids, 10-year-old daughter, 3-year-old boy, and that 8-year-old boy. So they're all in
Awesome.
school. So they're great.
Yeah, that's great. And
And
do you
they
have
I was just gonna say they've seen my transition over the couple years, and I think I've really instilled the importance of nutrition and exercise, and they'll jump in the basement with me and do some reps on the bench press with me, and so it's really good to be a good influence on them from that standpoint.
that's that's worth all of it. Like right there, that's everything. Like to be able to envision a life where you're doing things that you couldn't even consider before and be a good example for your kids and know that you're going to be around for a really long time to see them grow up.
Yeah,
It's just it's absolutely wonderful.
100%.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and your story. Is there anything that we missed that you would like to mention?
No, I think everything has been great. Like I said, if you are out there and you're just you're hearing this and you want to start your own journey, it doesn't cost any money to get healthy. Just there's lots of resources on YouTube. Um, all it takes is just internal motivation, and if you get your nutrition right, then everything will fall into place. So you can do it if you believe in yourself.
Wonderful. That is wonderful advice. And one of the best things about being around in 2023 is there are people doing the work, people like you that are on Twitter that are sharing the message. And it's getting out there. People are finding it. It's not a lot. It's not, everyone, but I do believe we're going in the right direction. You're such a big part of that. Mike Fitzpatrick, where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Sure, you can go on Twitter at it is Mike Fitz.
Awesome. We will link that in the notes. Like I said, this has been an amazing conversation. Really, so I don't know, really grateful and fortunate for you that you were able to find this advice, that you cared enough to dig. I'm so glad that you found who you found when you found it, because I'm guessing if you'd have found other information, that could have gone the exact opposite way.
Yeah.
But yeah, just your desire to share the message and get it out to more people is just so inspiring. So thank you so very much for all the work that you do, and thank you so very much for making time to be on our show today. We super appreciate you.
Thanks so much, Casey. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.